I was 22 when I finally realized just how heavy words could be. I had spent my whole life carrying the weight of one voice more than anyone else's. My mom's. Her opinions weren't just opinions, they were verdicts, laws that I was forced to obey silently, even when they cut me down. It wasn't like I hadn't tried to explain myself. I had, over and over, in whispers and in bursts of tears, in letters she would never read, in texts she would ignore. I had tried to tell her that sometimes my chest felt like it was locked inside a cage, that mornings were battles to even move, that smiling sometimes felt like swallowing glass. "You're not depressed," she said one morning when I was 17, sitting cross-legged on my bed, hugging my knees like a shield. Her tone was calm, almost casual, as if she were delivering the weather forecast. "You're just lazy." I froze, a lump in my throat I couldn't swallow. I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her that it wasn't laziness, that my mind felt heavy, tangled like a storm trapped inside my skull. But I didn't. I learned early that arguing only made her impatient. I learned that nothing I said would convince her, so I didn't speak. And that's how it started. By the time I was 20, I had perfected silence. I stopped talking about my classes, my friends, my feelings, my disappointments. I stopped asking for advice. I stopped asking for help. I had internalized her voice so deeply that it became my own. "You're lazy. You're dramatic. You're overreacting." Every failure I feared, every moment of doubt, every tear I wanted to shed, I swallowed it. It wasn't easy. Some nights, I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, hands clenching the sheets, imagining what it would feel like to just scream until my lungs burned. Sometimes I tried writing it down, hoping that words on paper could take the edge off, but the journals always ended up tucked under the mattress, hidden from her, hidden from everyone, even myself sometimes. Her words didn't just silence me, they shaped me. I walked carefully through my 20s, trying to take up as little space as possible. In college I smiled when I didn't want to, laughed when jokes didn't reach me, kept my opinions to myself even when I had something important to say. I had learned to anticipate her judgment, to censor every thought before it could escape my lips. "You're overthinking," she'd say if I mentioned something bothering me. "Stop with the drama," she'd snap if I cried in front of her. "Just get over it," she'd say, as if emotion were a disease you could cure with sheer will. By 22 I didn't even try anymore. I had built a fortress around myself, walls so high that not even her sharpest words could penetrate them. I had learned to move through the world quietly, politely, efficiently, the perfect combination of invisible and competent. And yet, even with all that practice, the past clung to me like a shadow. Some nights, when I thought I was alone, I would feel the sting of her judgment, her dismissive laughter echoing through my chest. I hated that it still hurt, hated that I still remembered every word as if it were carved into me. That morning, the one that would change everything, I was in my small apartment, curled up on the couch, half wrapped in a blanket, staring at my laptop. I wasn't doing anything. I wasn't even reading. I was just sitting, letting my mind drift to the familiar ache of solitude. And then the phone rang. I knew immediately whose number it was. Her name flashed on the screen, bright and insistent. My stomach clenched. I didn't answer. I didn't move. She left a voicemail, and I listened to it through the crackling speaker. Her voice was different. It wasn't sharp or commanding. It wasn't filled with judgment. It was small, tentative, vulnerable. "Hey, I need you," she said, the words trembling, almost breaking in the way I remembered only seeing when she thought no one was looking. I froze. My chest tightened. Every instinct in me screamed to keep the distance I had so carefully maintained for years. And yet, part of me, the part that had been silent and careful for too long, wanted to rush, to fix it, to be the daughter I had been taught I wasn't allowed to be. But I didn't. Not yet. I hung up, staring at the blank screen, feeling the quiet power of choice settle over me. For the first time in years, I realized that I got to decide what my presence meant, and when it would matter. Not her, not the voice that had haunted me for over a decade. For a long time, I sat there, wrapped in my blanket, letting the weight of my silence sink in. I thought about every time she had laughed at my tears, mocked my exhaustion, dismissed my pain. I thought about every year I had spent shrinking to fit her expectations. And I thought, finally, that this silence, my silence, might just be the first thing she's ever truly felt in return. Days passed. Not weeks, not months, just ordinary days. But each one felt heavier after that voicemail. I kept replaying her words, "I need you," over and over in my head. At first I thought it was some fluke. A crack in her usually impenetrable armor, a fleeting plea I wasn't meant to take seriously. But by the third day I realized it wasn't. She was calling again, leaving more messages, each one slightly more urgent, slightly more fragile. The voice I had grown up fearing was now faltering. There was no snap, no lecture, no dismissive attitude remark, there was just need. And it was raw. I wanted to look away. I wanted to pretend it wasn't happening, but I couldn't. Something deep inside me, something I had buried under years of silence, stirred. It wasn't compassion exactly. It was awareness, power. I could feel it simmering under the surface, quiet but undeniable. She had never had to face the consequences of her words. Not really. Until now. I spent that morning pacing my apartment, making coffee I didn't drink, letting my mind wander through all the years I had swallowed her judgment whole. Every insult, every belittling comment, every tear I had shed quietly in my room, all of it came back in a slow, aching flood. And beneath it all, I felt the familiar twist of control. For once the balance had shifted. When she finally called again, I answered. My voice was steady, calm, but with the weight of years behind it. "What is it?" I asked. There was a pause. I could almost hear her heart hammering over the line. I need help," she said finally, each word struggling to stay in place. It was strange. She had never spoken to me like that, vulnerable, uncertain, pleading, and I realized, with a slow, deliberate clarity, that I didn't have to fix it. Not yet, not automatically. She had taken so much from me, my confidence, my trust, my voice, that I owed myself a moment of power, a moment to breathe. Instead of rushing to her side, I asked questions, practical questions. What happened? Who else was involved? What exactly did she need? And I let her answer. I let her stumble through her words, flounder in ways I had never allowed myself to when I was younger. It was intoxicating. Not in a cruel way, but in a way that made me realize how much I had grown, how much space I had claimed for myself in the world. She told me everything. Her health had been failing slowly. Minor incidents she had brushed off as nothing. She had tried calling a friend, a neighbor, but no one could help. And now, finally, she had reached the person she had spent so long dismissing, me. As she spoke, I felt the anger from years past rise, but not uncontrollably. It was a quiet, simmering heat, the kind that sits beneath your skin, reminding you of all you've endured, all you've survived. And then, even as she pleaded, I felt another emotion take hold, satisfaction. Not revenge yet, not the dramatic payoff I knew would come, but the quiet, patient satisfaction that she was finally in a position she had never considered possible, needing me, depending on me, realizing that her control had limits. I didn't say yes immediately. I didn't promise to come. I simply listened, let her talk, let her stumble, let her realize the world had changed. I was no longer the scared, pliable daughter who swallowed her words like medicine. I was grown, I was whole, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it felt like to hold the reins. By the afternoon I made a plan, not a dramatic confrontation that would come later. No, this was subtler. This was about timing, control, patience. I would help her, yes, because it was the right thing to do, but on my terms. She would feel the tension she had so carelessly sown in me, and she would understand that her mockery had consequences she could no longer ignore. The evening came. I dressed carefully, consciously. I chose a simple, elegant outfit, something that reflected my newfound self-respect, not flashy, not confrontational, but deliberate. Even standing in front of the mirror, adjusting the hem, smoothing the fabric, I felt the quiet thrill of power. I was in control. She would see it soon enough. When I arrived at her house, she opened the door before I could knock. Her face was pale, drawn, her eyes wide in a way I hadn't seen since I was a child. I stepped inside, and the house, once a symbol of her authority, her control, felt smaller, quieter. I felt my own presence expand in it, filling the space she had always occupied with her demands. She tried to speak, to apologize, to explain, but I raised a hand gently, and she fell silent. The balance had shifted, and I smiled, quietly, just enough to let her know I was finally seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time in my life. That night I didn't say much. I let her fumble, let her beg, let her acknowledge, in the most intimate way possible, that I was no longer hers to dismiss. I made her tea. I listened to her words. I waited, patiently, silently. The walls she had built around my voice had been replaced with my own, and now the silence she had once mocked was hers to feel. The morning sun filtered through the blinds in soft stripes, painting the kitchen floor with pale gold. I stood there quietly, my hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea, and let her speak first. She hadn't expected me to arrive with such calm, I could tell, because the usual tremor in her tone had been replaced by hesitation. Every syllable she uttered seemed measured, as though she were calculating whether she could still control me with words. She didn't realize control had left her long ago. I seated myself at the small kitchen table, crossing my legs carefully, posture perfect, shoulders squared. My mug rested between my hands, but my presence filled the room far more than any object could. She sat opposite me, eyes darting, trying to gauge if the old patterns would still work. She opened her mouth, started a sentence, stopped. She shifted, reaching for her own mug, but I saw the hesitation, the unease. You came, she said, voice small. Yes, I replied simply. No apology, no warmth, no trembling recognition of her previous authority, just a calm, measured truth. Her lips parted again, but the words she had rehearsed for years, the dismissive cutting phrases that had kept me shrinking and apologizing, faltered. The silence between us stretched, heavy but deliberate, a quiet tension that demanded attention. I took a sip of my tea. The warmth flowed through me, grounding me. I let my eyes linger on her, not in malice but in deliberate observation. Every micro-expression, every involuntary twitch of unease, I noted. She had underestimated me, and now she had to feel it. You've changed, she finally said, the words trembling, fragile. I smiled faintly. I suppose we all do. Her eyes widened and I could see her calculating. What did that mean? That I was stronger, smarter, more distant? She couldn't place it, and the uncertainty weighed on her. For the first time, the table between us wasn't just wood and mugs. It was a boundary, a line of power I controlled. She tried again, softer this time. I didn't mean. I know, I said, cutting her off. But my tone was neutral, not cruel. I wasn't here to punish recklessly. I was here to demonstrate something she had never understood, that words have consequences, that dismissing someone, belittling them for years, creates a reckoning you can't avoid forever. Her hand twitched on her mug. She hadn't noticed it until now, but I had. I let my gaze rest on her, calm and unwavering, and she flinched, just slightly but enough. Enough to know that her old tactics, her sarcasm, her laughter, her dismissals, had no power here. You think this is about me needing you? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. I shook my head slowly. No, this is about you, finally understanding that I exist on my own terms, that I am not the scared, pliable child you once thought I was. She swallowed hard, her lips pressed into a thin line. I watched as the realization slowly sank in. The woman who had once cowered, the child who had swallowed tears silently, was gone. I was here, fully grown, fully aware, and fully in control of how this moment unfolded. We sat in silence after that, the kind of silence that isn't empty, it hums with potential, with power, with lessons finally learned. I sipped my tea, letting it linger in my mouth, letting her squirm with the unspoken understanding she could not manipulate this situation. She could not undo the years of neglect and mockery, but she could finally feel the weight of her own vulnerability. And yet I didn't rush her. I didn't confront her with anger. That would have been satisfying, yes, but not lasting. Instead, I allowed the truth to settle naturally between us. I allowed her to feel the dissonance of needing someone she had dismissed, needing someone who had learned how to survive without her. Her voice cracked at one point, barely audible. I don't know what to do. I let a small controlled smile play on my lips. You can start by acknowledging that what you said to me mattered, that it shaped me, that it hurt me. She flinched. Her hands trembled slightly on the edge of the table. For the first time she was forced to confront the consequences of her words, not with denial or deflection, but with direct experience. Minutes stretched. Hours could have passed. Time had no meaning in that room, only the quiet shift of power, subtle but absolute. I could see it in her eyes. Fear, hesitation, shame, recognition, and I felt a satisfaction so deep and slow it felt almost like a physical presence, wrapping around me, steadying me. Finally, she spoke, almost in a whisper. I see now. Yes, I said, my tone firm but calm. You do, and that is enough for now. I rose from the table, collected my empty mug, and left it there deliberately. A simple gesture, but it carried weight. I had demonstrated control without cruelty. I had shown her patience without weakness. I had allowed her to feel, truly feel, what it meant to rely on someone she had once dismissed. As I stepped toward the door, I glanced back once. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, and I could see her processing, the gears in her mind turning for the first time in years. And for the first time I understood the true power of presence, of measured silence, of letting someone recognize their mistakes on their own. The shift was complete. She was finally learning that my voice, my choices, my life, belonged to me, not to her. And I, for the first time in my life, felt the calm, quiet victory of someone who had finally taken control of her own narrative. By the evening, the air in her living room felt charged, almost electric. The sunlight had faded into a soft golden dusk, casting long shadows across the furniture. I stayed seated on the couch, my posture deliberate, my hands folded over my lap. She hovered near the doorway, unsure, hesitant, a stark contrast to the unwavering authority she had displayed all my life. You don't have to do this," she stammered. Her voice trembled slightly, betraying the unease I had been cultivating in her over the past few days. "I know," I said softly, letting the words linger. "But I think you need to understand what it feels like to be dismissed, overlooked, ignored, the way you did to me for years." Her shoulders slumped. The sharpness, the snap in her voice, all gone. She looked smaller somehow, as though the walls she had built around her authority had been quietly dismantled in my presence. I could see it in her eyes, the realization of all the years she had wasted mocking me, the truth of the pain she had inflicted, the helplessness she now felt when she turned to me for guidance. And I let her feel it, fully. No lectures, no anger, just the stillness, the gravity of her own actions reflected back at her. She took a tentative step toward me. I'm sorry," she whispered. The words sounded foreign, almost awkward, like she was trying on a voice she had never allowed herself to use before. I studied her carefully, the way she fumbled, the tremor in her hands, the shift in her gaze. "I hear you," I said. But I didn't move. I didn't hug her. I didn't rush to console. My presence alone, steady and unyielding, carried more weight than any embrace could. Hours passed in quiet conversation, her words halting, my responses calm and measured. I guided her gently, but only when I chose. Every time she looked at me, I reminded her silently, powerfully, that the dynamics had changed. The daughter who had once bent beneath her judgment no longer existed. I had claimed my space, my voice, my power, and she had to meet me there, on my terms. When the night fell fully, I prepared to leave. I stood slowly, smoothing the fabric of my outfit, taking care with every movement. She didn't try to stop me. She didn't ask me to stay. Instead, she watched, wide-eyed and humbled, as I walked toward the door. Before I stepped outside, I turned back. "Remember this feeling," I said softly. "Not for me, but for yourself. You need to understand that your words, your dismissals, your mockery, they have weight, they always do." Her lips parted, but no words came. She nodded, and I let that be enough. For once, I didn't need her approval, her acknowledgement, or her praise. I had what I had always wanted, the quiet satisfaction of someone finally understanding the consequences of their actions. As I walked out into the cool night air, I felt it settle inside me, the calm, unshakable certainty that I had reclaimed my life, my voice, and my power. And in that stillness, I finally allowed myself to breathe, knowing that she had felt for the first time the weight of what she had taken from me.